A Navy SEAL walked into that room thinking it would be just another easy win. 90 seconds later, nothing in his life would ever be the same. But this story doesn't start with a punch. It doesn't start with trash talk or a challenge thrown across a room. It starts with a look and a closed door and a silence so thick you could almost feel it pressing against your chest. Nobody in that room saw it coming. Nobody, except maybe one man. It was late 1968. The air smelled like sweat and leather, the kind of tension that doesn't make noise. It just sits there, heavy and waiting. Bruce Lee stood near the center of the mat. His black shirt, damp from exertion, clung to a lean, precise body, not built for size, but built for speed, built for control. He watched quietly as a group of military men ran through basic defensive drills. Their movements were stiff, mechanical. These were men who hadn't yet learned to listen to their own bodies. Bruce had been invited quietly as a personal favor to a friend who trained candidates for special operations. The session was supposed to be simple, a technical demonstration, a conversation between men who understood violence not as performance, but as a last resort. One man in that room, however, hadn't come to learn anything. Staff Sergeant Ray Dalton stood at the back wall with his arms crossed. He was nearly 6 feet tall and over 220 pounds of dense, functional muscle, not the kind earned under gym lights, but forged in freezing water, controlled explosions, and deployments where a single mistake cost lives. His forearms looked like dock rope. His posture said everything. A predator at rest, not sleeping, just waiting. From the moment Bruce stepped onto the mat, Dalton's eyes never left him. To Dalton, the barefoot man in front of him wasn't a threat. He was a curiosity, an actor, a myth that had been allowed to grow too large. Sure, he'd heard the stories circulating around the base, that this guy was different, that he'd accepted private challenges, that his speed seemed to break the laws of physics. But Dalton didn't deal in stories. He didn't believe in legends. In his world, truth had only one language: broken bones, silenced breath, and men who didn't get back up. The session continued. Bruce worked with one of the younger recruits, adjusting his posture with 2 fingers, correcting the angle of his elbow, explaining the mechanics of a stop hit with the calm clarity of a professor. His voice was low and unhurried. No drama, no performance. Every single movement had a reason. Nothing was wasted. He wasn't teaching them how to punch. He was teaching them how to finish. When the session paused for water, Dalton peeled himself off the wall and started walking forward. Conversations died. A few men exchanged quick glances. Everyone felt it, that invisible shift when the temperature of a room changes without anyone touching the thermostat. Bruce noticed him coming. He didn't react. He just stood there, a towel draped over one shoulder, breathing easy, as if this moment carried no weight at all. Dalton stopped a few feet from the mat. "So, you're the guy?" he said. No anger in his voice, no open challenge either. Something worse than both, a flat, absolute certainty, the confidence of a man who had never once had reason to question himself. Bruce tilted his head slightly. "I'm a guy." A few nervous laughs slipped out from the recruits. Dalton didn't smile. "I've heard a lot about you," he continued. "They say you're fast, say you put a few karate guys on the floor who didn't know what they were stepping into." He let the silence stretch, deliberate, calculated. "But I've been wondering something," Dalton said, taking a half step forward. "What happens when you face a real man, someone who's been through hell, not a tournament fighter, not an actor worried about keeping his face pretty?" Another step. "Someone who doesn't believe in rules." The room went completely still. Bruce's expression didn't change. His body stayed loose, balanced, like water held just behind a dam. He didn't raise his hands into a fighting stance. He didn't tighten his shoulders. The only thing that shifted were his eyes. They locked onto Dalton with a focus so total, so precise, as if Bruce was seeing him clearly for the very first time, not as a nuisance, but as a genuine possibility. "Are you asking me to fight you?" Bruce asked, his voice quiet. No challenge in the words, no sarcasm either. It was an honest question, almost clinical. Dalton shrugged. "I'm asking you to prove you're not what I think you are." Bruce held his gaze. "And what do you think I am?" "A fraud." The word landed in the room like a slap. The officer who had organized the session stepped forward, ready to shut it down, but Bruce raised one hand slightly, without even glancing in his direction. That small gesture was enough. The officer stopped. "If I'm a fraud," Bruce said, completely calm, "then you have nothing to worry about." For a moment, Dalton didn't move. Then he smiled. It was the first time he had, slow, cold, and predatory. "Then let's find out." What happened next became one of the most carefully guarded stories among everyone who was in that room that night, not because of the violence, though there was violence, but because of what it revealed. About a confrontation, yes, but more than that, about a man who understood combat at a level that had nothing to do with size, strength, or military rank. In less than 90 seconds, everything Ray Dalton believed about fighting would be permanently dismantled. The officer in charge, Lieutenant Commander Harmon, stepped forward with open hands. "Gentlemen, this is not—" "It's all right," Bruce said gently, cutting him off. "Let him have what he wants." Dalton was already pulling off his shirt. What it revealed stopped several men cold. His torso was a map of hardened muscle, years of brutal conditioning made visible. Scars crossed his ribs and shoulders, souvenirs from missions that would never be discussed in public. He rolled his neck. The crack was loud enough for everyone to hear. Then he walked to the center of the mat with the ease of a man who had survived far worse than this. Bruce handed his towel to a nearby recruit without looking at him. He didn't stretch, he didn't shake out his arms or settle into a fighting stance. He simply walked forward and stopped, roughly 6 feet from Dalton. The men in the room arranged themselves naturally into a semicircle. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the low hum of the ventilation system and the distant, muffled echo of the bass outside. Dalton raised his hands into a boxer's guard, weight balanced, chin tucked, shoulders loaded and ready to fire. A stance carved out of real hours, real opponents, real consequences. He began circling slowly, reading the distance. Bruce stood almost square, hands low, feet positioned in a way that looked almost casual, but anyone in that room who truly understood fighting could see something else underneath it. A quiet readiness, a perfect balance, like a compressed spring that had learned to hide its tension. "Whenever you're ready, movie star." Bruce said nothing. Dalton feinted with his left shoulder. Bruce didn't move. He feinted again, sharper this time, with more commitment behind it. Nothing. A flicker of irritation crossed the sergeant's face. He was used to getting reactions, fear, stiffness, the flinch of a body that moved before the mind caught up. This man was giving him absolutely nothing. No tension to read, no rhythm to exploit, no intention to work with. So Dalton forced it. He threw a right straight, not full power, but a measuring punch, the kind designed to test a defense. A shot that had put bigger men than Bruce on the floor. Then Bruce moved. What happened next was so fast that several witnesses could never describe it accurately, no matter how many times they were asked. Bruce's torso shifted, barely a few inches to the left, just enough for Dalton's fist to graze past his cheek without making contact. Simultaneously, Bruce's right hand shot forward, a vertical punch, a travel distance of less than 12 inches. It landed directly on Dalton's sternum. His forward momentum stopped as if he'd walked into an invisible wall. His eyes went wide. The air left his lungs in a short, involuntary grunt. He stepped back twice, hands instinctively going to his midsection, as if trying to hold in place something that had shifted inside him.
Bruce was already still again, arm relaxed at his side. The entire exchange had taken less than 1 second. Dalton blinked, trying to reconstruct what had just happened. He had taken hits before, hard ones, brutal ones, the kind that crack ribs and blur vision. But this was different. There had been no wind-up, no rotation, no warning of any kind, and yet the impact had moved through him like an invisible hammer strike. "What the?" he muttered under his breath. He straightened up, forcing his breathing back under control. Pride rushed in immediately, trying to smother the one thing that had appeared in his eyes for the very first time: doubt.
He was a Navy SEAL. He had survived things most people couldn't imagine. He wasn't about to let one lucky punch from a man 50 pounds lighter shake him. He came forward again, this time more carefully. He threw a jab, then another. Both missed by impossible margins. Bruce barely moved his head, just enough for each fist to slice through empty air. No hurry, no urgency, as if time itself was on his side. Then Dalton committed. Jab, cross, left hook. 3 real punches, combat strikes, not sparring taps, attacks built to end a fight. Bruce slipped the jab, deflected the cross with his left hand, not blocking it, just redirecting it, letting the force pass through without resistance. The hook never arrived. In the same instant that Dalton's right arm was pulling back, Bruce stepped inside his guard and drove a rising palm strike up under his jaw. Dalton's head snapped back, his knees buckled. For a fraction of a second, his body hung suspended between balance and collapse. Bruce could have ended it right there. Everyone in the room knew it. Instead, he stepped back and waited. Dalton shook his head hard. He tasted copper. His vision went white for a moment. When the world came back into focus, Bruce was standing in the exact same spot, calm, still, waiting. Something broke behind Dalton's eyes. The professional discipline that had carried him through years of impossible situations began to fracture, and underneath it, something older rose to the surface, something primitive. This was the look of a man whose entire identity was being called into question. He stopped thinking, stopped analyzing. He just wanted to cause damage. Dalton launched all 220 pounds of himself forward with total commitment. His plan was simple: close the distance, eliminate the speed advantage, turn this into a war of raw strength and will. Against most opponents, it would have worked. Bruce didn't retreat. He moved forward. They met in the center of the mat, but what should have been a collision became something else entirely. At the last possible moment, Bruce rotated his body just a few degrees. Dalton's momentum carried him past, his own weight wrenching him off his axis. At the same time, Bruce's front leg swept low, hooking Dalton's lead ankle from underneath. His own power became the weapon used against him. He hit the mat hard, shoulder and hip taking the full impact. Before he could even begin to orient himself, a fist stopped 1 inch from his throat. Not a punch, a statement. The entire room held its breath. Bruce pulled his hand back and stepped away. Dalton climbed to his feet with effort, face flushed, exhaustion mixing with something darker. A thin line of blood traced its way from the corner of his mouth. "Lucky," he said. The word carried almost no conviction. Bruce didn't respond. Dalton moved again, but something was different now. The fluidity was gone. The arrogance that had walked through the door with him was visibly crumbling, and he could feel it happening in real time, which made everything worse. He threw a low kick, Muay Thai style, aiming to punish Bruce's front leg. Bruce checked it with his shin, face unchanged. As Dalton's leg returned to the floor, Bruce's rear leg launched forward, a clean, precise side kick. His heel landed just below the hip bone. The effect was immediate. Dalton's left leg gave out. He stumbled, catching himself on the shoulder of a nearby recruit. The grab was instinctive, human, honest. A murmur moved through the room. Dalton let go and turned back to face Bruce, limping.
His rational mind was screaming at him to stop, that this was finished, that there was no version of this where he won. But his identity wouldn't let him listen. "That all you've got?" he managed, spitting the words out more from pride than belief. Bruce tilted his head slightly. For the first time since this had all begun, something resembling emotion crossed his face. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. "You're hurt," he said quietly. "There's no need to continue." Dalton shook his head. "I'll decide when it's over." Bruce studied him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Then you've already decided." Dalton charged one more time, reaching for a clinch, trying to close the distance through sheer will. His hands grabbed nothing but air. Bruce moved with perfect economy, turning just enough, and his elbow rose in a short, tight arc that was invisible until the final instant. It connected directly to the temple. The sound was dry and final. Dalton dropped to his knees. His eyes lost focus, as if the world had shifted a few degrees off its axis. "Enough," Commander Harmon said firmly, stepping forward with relief in his voice. But Dalton wasn't finished. He pushed himself upright on unsteady legs, held together by nothing but pride, and threw a right hand, slow, desperate, telegraphed from a mile away. What Bruce did next would be talked about for years. He didn't dodge it. He didn't counter it. He caught the wrist, redirected the motion, and in that same seamless movement applied precise pressure to a point just below the ear. Dalton's body went rigid for half a second. Then he went down. Silence filled the room completely. Dalton lay unconscious on the mat, breathing in shallow waves. Bruce took one step back. His own breathing was steady and even. There was no triumph on his face, no contempt, no satisfaction, just stillness. Harmon rushed to Dalton's side. "He's breathing. Someone get the medic." Bruce picked up his towel and calmly wiped his hands, the same way a professor might straighten his notes after a lecture. A young recruit, voice still buzzing with adrenaline, worked up the courage to ask, "What did you do to him?" "I helped him rest," Bruce said simply. "How?" Bruce glanced at him briefly. "The body has many switches. Few people know where they are. Fewer still know how to use them." Dalton began to stir. When his eyes finally opened, they found Bruce's immediately. There was shame in his expression, but something else too, something that hadn't been there before. Recognition. "You lost," Harmon said, his voice firm but quiet. Dalton didn't argue. He sat with it for a moment, then spoke. "I've fought a lot of men. I mean really fought them, and I couldn't even touch you." Bruce walked over and crouched down in front of him. "You're strong, you're experienced, but you fought with your body, not your mind." Dalton frowned. "What does that mean?" "You decided who I was before we started. You spent the whole fight against the man you imagined, not the one standing in front of you." He paused for a moment. "Fighting isn't about force, it's about truth. The man who sees reality clearly will always beat the man who only sees what he wants to see." Dalton swallowed hard. "I've built my whole life around being the toughest man in the room. If I'm not that, then what am I?" Bruce extended his hand. A man who just started becoming truly strong. Months later, Dalton showed up at the gym in Los Angeles where Bruce trained. He didn't come to fight, he came to learn. Years after that, after Bruce Lee was gone, Dalton would look back on that night not as a defeat, but as the moment someone handed him a truth he could never put down. The mind can take a lifetime to master, but the man who masters it can never truly be beaten. If this story reminded you that real strength doesn't live in your muscles, it lives in your mind, then subscribe to the channel, because we don't just tell you about fights here, we show you the battles that change men forever. See you in the next one.